The morning mist clung to the African savanna like a gossamer veil, transforming the landscape into something ethereal and dreamlike. Golden rays of sunlight pierced through the haze, illuminating dewdrops that sparkled like scattered diamonds across the endless grassland. The air was thick with the scent of wild jasmine and the earthy aroma of rain-soaked soil from the previous night's downpour. In a secluded grove where ancient baobab trees stood like sentinels against time, a lioness named Ashanti moved with fluid grace through the tall grass. Her tawny coat bore the scars of countless battles, thin white lines that spoke of territorial disputes, hunting accidents, and the harsh realities of survival in the wild. Her amber eyes, fierce yet gentle, constantly swept the landscape for both danger and opportunity. Beside her, tumbling through the grass with unbridled joy, was her 3-month-old cub, Jengo. His golden fur was still soft with youth, unmarked by the trials that would inevitably come. His playful pounces at butterflies and grasshoppers filled Ashanti's heart with a warmth that made all her struggles worthwhile. This was her first surviving cub after losing 2 previous litters to disease and predators, a loss that had nearly broken her spirit. The grove held painful memories for another creature entirely. Deep within the shadows of the baobab trees lived Kesi, a massive silverback gorilla whose presence commanded respect throughout the territory. His broad chest bore silver-gray fur that marked him as an elder, and his intelligent dark eyes held depths of sorrow that few creatures could fathom. Kesi had once led a thriving family group, 7 members strong, including his beloved mate Zuri and their young son Janani. They had lived in harmony within these same trees, their days filled with gentle grooming sessions, playful wrestling matches, and the simple joy of being together. But tragedy had struck 3 years ago when a pride of lions, desperate during a severe drought, had invaded their peaceful haven. The attack had been swift and merciless. Kesi had fought valiantly, his massive frame a whirlwind of protective fury, but he could not be everywhere at once. When the dust settled and the lions retreated, Zuri lay motionless beside the largest baobab, and little Janani was nowhere to be found. The rest of his family had fled, scattered to the winds by terror and grief. Since that devastating day, Kesi had lived in complete isolation, his heart encased in walls of bitterness and pain. He avoided all contact with other creatures, especially lions, whose very scent could send him into a rage that shook the ground beneath his feet. The grove became his prison and his sanctuary, a place where he could mourn in solitude while the world continued its relentless march around him. On this particular morning, as the mist began to lift and the sun climbed higher, Ashanti had chosen to bring Jengo to the grove's edge to hunt for ground birds. The area was rich with prey, and she needed to feed well to maintain her strength for milk production. She had no knowledge of the gorilla's presence, nor of the tragedy that had unfolded in this very spot. Jengo chased a colorful beetle through the grass, his tiny roar more of a squeak than anything threatening. Ashanti watched him with amusement, her guard momentarily lowered by the peaceful morning atmosphere. The beetle led Jengo in a winding path that took him further from his mother's side, but she felt no alarm. The grove seemed tranquil and safe. That tranquility shattered in an instant. A massive secretary bird, startled by Jengo's approach, burst from its ground nest with an explosive flutter of wings. The sudden movement triggered a chain reaction of panic throughout the grove. A family of warthogs crashed through the underbrush, their squeals piercing the air. Vervet monkeys shrieked warnings from the treetops, their cries echoing off the ancient bark of the baobabs. In the chaos, Jengo stumbled backward in fright, his tiny paws slipping on the dew-slicked grass. He tumbled down a small embankment, his frightened mews calling for his mother. But as he rolled, his small body struck the base of a dead baobab that had been slowly rotting from within. The impact, though minor, was enough to destabilize the ancient giant. With a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, the massive tree began its final descent. Ashanti's roar of alarm split the morning air as she bounded toward her cub, but the distance was too great, the tree's fall too swift. The baobab crashed to the ground with a thunderous boom that sent shockwaves through the grove. Dust and debris exploded upward, creating a choking cloud that obscured everything. When the dust began to settle, Ashanti's worst fears were realized. Jengo was trapped beneath one of the tree's massive branches, his small body pinned against the earth. Panic consumed her. She clawed frantically at the branch, her powerful muscles straining against the immovable weight. Her claws, sharp enough to bring down a zebra, scratched uselessly against the hardened bark. She bit at the wood until her mouth filled with bitter splinters, but the branch remained as solid as stone. Jengo's weak cries grew fainter with each passing moment. His tiny ribs struggled against the crushing weight, and Ashanti could see the light beginning to fade from his eyes. Desperation drove her to dig furiously at the ground beneath the branch, hoping to create enough space for her cub to breathe. But the earth was hard-packed and unyielding. From the shadows of the grove's depths, Kesi had heard the thunderous crash. The sound had awakened memories he had tried desperately to bury. The splintering of branches, the cries of his family, the weight of fallen timber. His massive frame trembled with remembered rage and grief as he moved through the trees toward the source of the disturbance. When he emerged into the clearing and saw the lioness frantically trying to free her trapped cub, every muscle in his body went rigid. The scent of lion filled his nostrils, triggering a flood of anguish and fury that made his vision blur red. This was the enemy, the species that had destroyed his world, that had taken everything he loved. Ashanti sensed his presence before she saw him. The very air seemed to change, becoming heavy with danger and barely contained violence. She turned slowly, her body instinctively placing itself between the massive gorilla and her trapped cub. Her lips pulled back in a snarl of warning, but it was a gesture born of desperation rather than true aggression. Kesi stood like a mountain of muscle and fury, his silver-backed form towering over the lioness. His hands were clenched into fists that could crush bones, and his dark eyes burned with years of accumulated hatred. For a long moment, predator and prey turned enemy faced each other across the clearing, the only sound being Jengo's increasingly faint whimpers. But then something extraordinary happened. As Kesi stared into Ashanti's eyes, he saw something that pierced through his armor of rage. He saw his own pain reflected back at him. The lioness's amber eyes held the same desperate love, the same helpless anguish that had consumed him 3 years ago. In that moment, she was not his enemy but a fellow parent facing the unthinkable loss of a child. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. This was not the same pride that had attacked his family. This was a mother, alone and terrified, watching her world crumble before her eyes. Just as he had been, Ashanti seemed to sense the shift in his demeanor. The raw hatred in his eyes flickered, replaced by something she had never expected to see: understanding. With a courage born of absolute desperation, she did something that went against every instinct in her predatory nature. She lowered herself to the ground, her powerful body collapsing into a posture of complete submission. The sight was shocking in its vulnerability. Here was one of Africa's most feared predators, reduced to begging for mercy from a creature she could never hope to defeat. Her proud head touched the earth, and from deep within her chest came a sound that was unlike anything in the natural world, a combination of growl, whimper, and sob that spoke of a mother's breaking heart. Kesi felt his breath catch in his throat. The sound was achingly familiar. It was the same sound Zuri had made as she lay dying, the same sound that had haunted his dreams for 3 years. Without conscious thought, he took a step forward, his massive frame moving with surprising gentleness. Ashanti remained prostrate, her entire body trembling with the effort of maintaining submission while every fiber of her being screamed at her to fight. She had never bowed to any creature, had never shown weakness even in the face of death. But for Jengo, she would do anything, even surrender her pride to an ancient enemy. The gorilla's approach should have terrified her, but instead, she felt a strange sense of hope. Something in his movement had changed, become less threatening and more thoughtful. She dared to raise her head slightly, meeting his gaze with eyes that pleaded more eloquently than any words could. Kesi knelt beside the massive branch, his intelligent eyes assessing the situation with the same careful attention he had once given to selecting the perfect fruit for his family's breakfast. The branch was enormous, easily weighing several hundred pounds, but he had moved heavier obstacles before. The question was not whether he could lift it, but whether he should. Every rational thought in his mind screamed at him to walk away, to let nature take its course, to allow the lions to suffer as they had made him suffer. But as he looked down at the tiny cub struggling beneath the branch, he saw not an enemy but an innocent, a small life that had played no part in the tragedy that had befallen his family. The internal battle raged within him for what felt like hours but was only moments. 3 years of grief and hatred warred against a lifetime of gentleness and compassion. The silverback who had once shared his food with hungry birds fought against the broken creature who had sworn never to help another living being. Finally, with a decision that would haunt and heal him in equal measure, Kesi placed his massive hands on the branch. Ashanti's eyes widened in disbelief as she realized what he intended to do. She quickly moved to position herself beneath the branch, ready to pull Jengo free the moment enough space was created. The gorilla's muscles bunched and strained as he began to lift. The branch groaned in protest, its massive weight fighting against his efforts. Veins stood out like cords along his arms and chest, and his breathing became labored as he slowly, inch by agonizing inch, began to raise the crushing timber. The physical effort was enormous, but the emotional weight was even greater. With each upward movement of the branch, Kesi was lifting not just wood but years of accumulated pain. He was choosing hope over hatred, compassion over revenge, healing over the comfortable familiarity of grief. As the branch rose higher, Ashanti saw her opportunity. With lightning-quick reflexes, she darted forward and gently but firmly grasped Jengo's scruff in her teeth. The cub was unconscious now, his small body limp and frighteningly still, but she could feel the faint flutter of his heartbeat against her tongue. The moment Jengo was clear, Kesi released his grip, and the branch crashed back to the earth with a resounding thud. The gorilla staggered backward, his massive chest heaving with exhaustion, sweat glistening on his dark fur. He watched with weary eyes as Ashanti frantically licked her cub's face, trying to revive him with the warmth of her tongue. For several terrifying seconds, Jengo remained motionless. Then, with a weak mew that was the most beautiful sound either parent had ever heard, the cub's eyes fluttered open. He was injured, his left hind leg was clearly broken, and his breathing was shallow. But he was alive. Ashanti's relief was so overwhelming that she nearly collapsed. She nuzzled her cub gently, tears streaming down her feline face as she whispered soft growls of reassurance. Then, in a gesture that surprised even herself, she turned to face Kesi. The massive gorilla was standing at the edge of the clearing, preparing to melt back into the shadows from which he had emerged. But Ashanti's soft call stopped him. When he turned, he saw her approaching slowly, carrying the injured cub in her mouth. She stopped just beyond arm's reach and carefully placed Jengo on the ground. What happened next defied every law of nature and biology. Ashanti lowered her head in a deep bow, her entire body language expressing a gratitude so profound it needed no words. She held the pose for several seconds, allowing the silverback to understand the depth of her appreciation. Kesi felt something he had not experienced in 3 years, a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with anger or grief. For the first time since losing his family, he had acted not from pain but from compassion. He had chosen to be the creature Zuri had fallen in love with, the gentle giant who had once comforted injured birds and shared his food with hungry neighbors. The gorilla gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, then turned and began to walk back toward the grove's depths. But after a few steps, he paused and looked back. Ashanti was still watching him, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. In that moment, an understanding passed between them, a recognition that they were both survivors, both parents, both creatures who had known loss and chosen to protect life despite their pain. As the days passed, word of the incredible rescue spread throughout the animal kingdom via the complex network of sounds, scents, and behaviors that constituted their communication system. The story was told and retold, growing in the telling but never losing its essential truth, that a silverback gorilla had saved the life of a lion cub, and in doing so, had saved his own soul. Jengo's recovery was slow but steady. Under his mother's devoted care, his broken leg healed, though he would always walk with a slight limp. The injury became a reminder not of weakness but of the day when two species chose compassion over conflict, when an ancient enemy became an unexpected savior. Ashanti never forgot the debt she owed to Kesi. In the months that followed, she would occasionally bring prey to the edge of the grove, not close enough to threaten the solitary gorilla, but near enough for him to find if he chose to. She never saw him take the offerings, but they always disappeared, and she liked to think that her small gestures of gratitude brought him some measure of comfort. For Kesi, the act of mercy had begun a slow process of healing. He did not emerge from his solitude immediately, but the crushing weight of hatred that had pressed down on his heart for 3 years began to lift. He started to notice things he had ignored, the beauty of sunrise filtering through the baobab leaves, the cheerful chatter of weaver birds building their nests, the simple pleasure of fresh fruit after a rain. One evening, As the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kesi sat beneath the largest baobab tree, the one where Zuri had died. For the first time in 3 years, he did not feel the familiar stab of anguish at the memory. Instead, he felt something else, a gentle sadness mixed with gratitude for the time they had shared. "I saved a life today," he whispered to the wind, speaking to the spirit of his beloved mate. "I chose to help instead of harm. I think you would have been proud." The wind rustled through the leaves above him, and for a moment, Kesi could have sworn he heard the soft rumble of Zuri's contented purr. The sound brought tears to his eyes, but they were tears of healing rather than grief. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Kesi made a decision that would change the course of his remaining years. He would not abandon his solitude entirely. The wounds were too deep for that, but he would no longer allow hatred to rule his heart. He would remember Zuri and Janani not with bitterness but with love, and he would honor their memory by embodying the compassion they had taught him. In the distance, he could hear the sound of Ashanti calling to her cub, her voice filled with the joy of a mother whose child had been given a second chance at life. The sound no longer filled him with rage but with a quiet satisfaction. He had helped create that joy, had chosen to be part of life's continuation rather than its destruction. The grove fell silent as night deepened, but it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the peaceful quiet of a place where healing had begun, where an ancient enemy had become an unexpected friend, and where the power of compassion had proven stronger than the weight of grief. In the years that followed, Jengo grew into a strong young lion, his slight limp a barely noticeable reminder of the day his life had hung in the balance. He never knew the full story of his rescue, but he sensed that the grove held special significance for his mother. Sometimes, when they passed near the baobab trees, Ashanti would pause and gaze into the shadows with an expression of profound gratitude. The story of the lioness and the silverback became legend among the animals of the savannah, passed down through generations as a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal, even the most bitter enemies could find common ground, and even the darkest moments could give birth to unexpected mercy. And in the grove where tragedy had once reigned supreme, life continued its eternal dance, watched over by the spirit of a gentle giant who had chosen love over hatred, compassion over revenge, and healing over the comfortable familiarity of pain. The baobab trees stood as silent witnesses to the miracle that had unfolded beneath their branches, a miracle that proved that sometimes the strongest creatures are those who choose to use their power not to destroy but to save, not to hate but to heal, not to take revenge but to offer redemption. In the end, both the lioness and the silverback had found something they had not expected, a kind of peace that came not from forgetting the past but from choosing to let it guide them toward a more compassionate future. They had learned that true strength lies not in the ability to inflict pain but in the courage to heal it, not in the power to destroy but in the wisdom to protect. And so the legend lived on, a testament to the transformative power of mercy and the endless capacity of the heart to choose hope over despair, love over hatred, and life over death. Thank you for watching this video. I would be grateful for your like. Please do not forget to subscribe so as not to miss other interesting stories. See you soon.